this is not the film I want to make, but it is the film I have to make, are what you said about this film, and they personally have just stuck with me ever since I read them. And I was curious if you could take us back to that moment when you committed yourself to making this film. And then where did the process of making it take you? It took you over like you started in 2019.
Yeah.
How did that process change from when you said, I have to make this film and I'm going to make it, to where you are now?
So I felt when we started finding out what was wrong with Charlie that we were hiding, that we were going around saying we're having neurological testing, and it was just too difficult to admit what was happening. And yet what was happening to us is happening to more than 55 million other families around the world. And I felt like, here I am, I've had this amazing career as a casting director, I've worked with these amazing directors, and I felt we have to make this story. You know, there's some people say I always wanted to direct. I did not say that, I did not come to it like that. I learned that, and I got my voice doing that in making this film. But convincing my family, I feel like, thank you, Eloise is here, Tobias in New York. Eloise, they are our heart and soul, the thing that Charlie and I did best, obviously. But I had to convince the family, and I feel like in some ways, you know, they were used to Mom. You saw a lot of archival footage. I was always filming, but nobody knew what this was going to be like. And it was hard. I didn't know what it was going to be like. And who knew that I cast a perfect husband leading man? I mean, that was complete luck that this would work. But I just felt somehow something got in me, like, I have privilege, we're here, work in Hollywood, but I mean by privilege to, I had the tools to make this. And I had to tell it, not for us, for everyone who's going through this. Nobody knows what it's like. So it was a hard road, but that's what started. And then Alex Gibney, my executive producer, he and I have a project together. We've been working on a narrative project for years called Exiles on Main Street, and he's the one person I knew in the doc space really well. And he's a hard-hitting documentarian, and I sent him a 3-page, you know, sort of idea of a movie, and he saw a movie in it, and he encouraged me from the get-go.
So speaking of like some of those amazing directors that you've worked with, like Wayne Wang, Wim Wenders, and Sally Potter, I'm curious, like, when you started this journey, like, did you start thinking of them and when you were working with them and the lessons that they may have taught you and now they're coming back to you?
Absolutely. And they were all with me. Sometimes I talked to some of them, sometimes not. Mark Pellington is here. Thank you, Mark. His film Father's Days, about his own experience, inspired me. Every director I worked with, I thought about how do they approach this. So, you know, as a casting director, you're in the room with actors. I love actors. I miss being in the room, doing that process of discovering character. So I came from this from a narrative point of view, and I feel like a lot of the directors that you mentioned, like some gave me advice, and most the advice was stick to your gut. It's your story. But they were really helpful.
And then just because you're such an amazing, talented casting director, and what you were saying in your intro about it may be a little bit of an unsung role in film production, but it's certainly incredibly important. But what is it about the role of casting director that you love the most? What do you love about doing that with a filmmaker and on a film?
Well, as a casting director, you're helping complete the picture by creating the character. And you're a collaborator. Filmmaking is a very collaborative. And you're there at the beginning, like in the writing of it. And I feel like you have this front row seat into what is this story, which way can it be? There's often more than one actor for each role, and you're imagining each person sort of taking it on and creating their own story with it. And in a documentary, it's a different version of casting, right? Some of it it's you get what you get, and is that going to translate into telling the story? I wanted a story that would feel lyrical, that would have an arc to it, that this took a long time to sort of find and weave our way. And I think the casting background that I had allowed me to understand where I could find the nuance, where I could find the character. Because it wasn't just like Eloise, is an artist, or Tobias is a writer, but it was connecting all of those pieces to what Charlie is and the story about him.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the audience? I believe we have a microphone that's roving around.
How has the process helped you dealing with the diagnosis? Is it a little bit of a helpful healing process for you? A coping mechanism, or pure storytelling? How personal has this gotten for you?
It's very personal, obviously, but I feel for me, I say in the movie, like, I needed something to cope and have purpose. And I also felt for Charlie, like, what am I going to do every day? I can't do my job. So this could become your job. Like, we are trying to expose a story. First of all, there needs to be so much more research and money put into developing other solutions, whether they be drugs or ways to live with this. So it became, in some ways, something that we had to do to push this forward for everyone. And so it did help me, because I feel like I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to tell the truth. It's not just about taking drug trials. There's a lot of hope being sold out there. It's a mission that I have about developing empathy for people, because we need to make space for all kinds of people to live in the world and whose brains are functioning differently. So there became a mission, I think, for us. Thank you.
Other questions from the audience?
Are you going to do more? Because 55 million people out there, and the story's not completely told.
Yes, I hope so. There's a lot of developing stories and ideas, and I hope that this opens up the dialogue about it. Just last week, the New York Times did a big expose about a drug that was out there that people were selling as like, this is gonna stop the course of the disease, and then they found that it's not just doing that, and it's very risky, and the big pharma is gonna make a lot of money when they find the right one, so they're selling it too hard, and I don't feel that we really understand it completely. Look, Alzheimer's research really started in earnest in the 1980s. We are behind. This is a disease that we've known for over 100 years. So we're now at this point, I think that, Helena, you would say this as a researcher, like we're on the precipice of some big discoveries, but we still don't understand it all. So it is really important, and I want to do more, and I have other stories. And I also think that we don't recognize what it means to be a caregiver. What is that story? This is that too.
Do you have other questions?
This is kind of silly, Heidi, but related to what you just said. We saw you make pie for Charlie for breakfast.
Thank you.
But I want to know if you're allowing yourself to eat some pie for breakfast.
Often. You bring up a good point, Angela. Like, people say you're the caregiver, you have to take care of yourself. I would say bring over the oxygen mask. Like, just showing up is something that people don't do as often in our culture right now. I think COVID was a way for people to stay awake and people to wait to ask somebody to call you. And I say, don't wait, just call.
This specifically deals with Alzheimer's,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still so many people, as you know, who have cognitive impairment, confusion, all of those things, but don't have that formal diagnosis. And I'm wondering if you're going to address that, or if you sort of feel like we
So,
can work on that too.
Yeah, so maybe you can clarify it a little bit, is that Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. There's a large spectrum in what is cognitive impairment. Like when you see my mom in the movie, she had been diagnosed first with cognitive impairment. It was more general. But it is complicated, and I think the doctors here would say this. It's like, you can't just biopsy the brain to figure this out. A lot of times, we don't find out the real diagnosis until after a person has passed. So, but what, like for instance, if the reason we need to have a diagnosis is so that when we do find that treatment, we know what to treat. So if the person had Lewy body dementia as opposed to having Alzheimer's, might be a very different drug because it's different proteins or different things that are being treated. So it's complicated. I would like to make a whole science doc as well. But this was a personal story that we felt could really reach more people. And it's not just about Alzheimer's, right? Anybody, Charlie says it in the movie, like, you know, anything can happen to other people. It's like, how do you deal with that bomb that dropped in your family? But I'm extremely interested in going back to school, Helena and Marie, and getting into neurology.